Today we're going to be talking about dividing rational expressions. Before we can do so, we need to talk about 3 different situations that we can be in and if we can simplify those things or not, or what they would equal. So if we're taking and we have x plus 2 divided by 2 plus x, are those the same thing? Well, 3 plus 2 is 5, 2 plus 3 is 5, 5 divided by 5. So these two things can cross off and they would just equal a positive 1. What if we have x plus 2 divided by x minus 2? 3 plus 2 is 5, 3 minus 2 is 1, so those two things can't cancel, okay? So it's very important that you know that. X minus 2 divided by 2 minus x. Well, 3 minus 2 is positive 1, 2 minus 3 is negative 1. So these things can cancel, but when they do, they become a negative 1. Okay, so it's important for you to know these different situations. I would make sure that you write those down so that you know them. Next thing to look at is where we look for restrictions. So if we're taking 2/3 and we're dividing it by 5/6, when you're looking at this, remember the denominator is where we care about restrictions, so we'll be looking there. But with division, here, we know that we keep the first fraction the same and we, make that be multiplication. We keep that first fraction the same and the second one becomes flipped and we multiply. So that means that we're now looking here. So 3, 6, and 5, those things, bottom, bottom, top, is where we would be looking for restrictions. Bottom, bottom, top. The only place you don't look for restrictions is in the numerator of the first fraction. Okay, let's take a look at a couple of examples. So here's our first one. We have x squared minus 16 over x squared plus 10x plus 21 divided by x cubed minus 64 over x squared plus 3x. So in the first fraction, remember, with any of this, we're going to factor everything as much as possible. So we would get x plus 4, x minus 4. It's a difference of squares. In the second fraction here, in the denominator of the first fraction, we're going to factor that into x plus 7 and x plus 3, because we need two numbers that multiply to give us 21 and add to give us 10. Now, as we're factoring this next fraction, we're going to flip it. Okay, so x cubed minus 64 is a difference of cubes. So that would give us x minus 4, and then x squared plus 4x plus 16. And then the x squared plus 3x is going to flip to the top, and we are going to take a GCF of x out and be left with x plus 3. So then the next step of this process is to write our restrictions, so we don't want to forget that. Okay, so I'll write those further down here. Remember, we're looking for bottom, bottom, top. So here we would get negative 7 if we solved that, negative 3, a positive 4. Here, this x squared plus 4x plus 16, it's very, very tempting that it's going to look like it's factoring. Remember, that's never going to factor, so that would just produce imaginary answers, so that's not going to help us at all. Here we have the monomial x, so it's going to give us 0, and we already have negative 3 written down. Okay, so there are all of the restrictions for this question. Now I got to work on crossing things off. So I see an x minus 4 in both the numerator and the denominator, and an x plus 3 in the numerator and denominator. So that is everything that cancels out. So that means that we're going to have the quantity x times the quantity x plus 4 in the numerator. And in the denominator, we have the quantity x plus 7 times the quantity x squared plus 4x plus 16. So here's the simplified part of your answer. And then you also need restrictions. Okay? So let's take a look at one more. So we have x squared plus 3x plus 2 over x squared minus 1 divided by 2 plus x over 1 minus x. So again, we're going to factor. So that means that we need two numbers that multiply to give us 2 and add to give us 3. So it's going to be x plus 2 and x plus 1. X squared minus 1 is a difference of squares. So it's going to be x plus 1, x minus 1. 2 plus x is going to flip to the denominator. There's nothing we can do with that. And the same thing with 1 minus x. That's going to flip to the numerator, and there's nothing we can do there. So let's see what crosses off. So x plus 1, those are exactly the same. X plus 2, 2 plus x. When there's a plus sign in between them and they're backwards, that is the same thing. 1 minus x, x minus 1. Those are backwards from each other with subtraction sign, so those can cancel, but when they do, they become a negative 1. So all of that is just the same thing as a negative 1. Now, we didn't write our restrictions yet, which is fine. That just means that we need to go back and write them at the end. You could have written them before. So here we have negative 1, positive 1, negative 2, and then this one would also give us a positive 1 if we solved that for x. So remember, factor everything, flip the second fraction for multiplication, write restrictions, cross things off, and then look for anything that's left to write as your simplified answer. And that's it.